G'day, sports fans. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Sports by Fry podcast. At the start of May, I am back to recap another weekend of fantasy footy, talking some actual AFL tidbits as well. And I think at the back end of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about my conference semifinals predictions. We're underway. The second round of the NBA playoffs officially commenced. And earlier this morning, Steph Curry had a little bit of a say in the outcome of Game 7 as well. So plenty of sports stuff to talk about. Let's get into another episode. You're all here to listen to the fantasy stuff, so let's start with that. Round 7 was a pretty good time for the majority of fantasy coaches, but as a result, there wasn't too many teams that didn't score big, and you didn't probably change a ton in rankings unless you had an absolute belter. I was somewhere in the middle of the road. I had 22.89. I missed the boat with the Rowan Marshall vice captain chance. I ended up VCing Timmy English and then rolled that into Nick Dacos. So a pair of 99s from the two leaders of the large fries and Coke this week. But 22.89 is not a score to be sneezed at. There were some pretty big performances. I held on to Tom Green and Will Day throughout their suspensions, and as a result, they were able to combine for 236 points, which was a welcome sign. I still have way too many rookies on my field, though, so still very early doors. I think I'm going to wait until team selection to really dictate where I'm going to go with my trades, but Mateus Philippou will probably get flicked out, and I'll try and chase a somewhat mid-pricer, a couple of which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but getting the rookies off is still the priority as we get closer to the bye rounds. There's only 5 weeks left until the buys are here. I've had a little bit of a look forecasting forward, and I've got a healthy balance. I don't think it's something that you really need to take too much into account when dictating your trades, especially if you're getting in a keeper for the rest of the season, but it's something to monitor and have a look at moving forward at least. All right, I'm going to do this every Monday, or as I recap every round of footy, I'm going to go through 10 noteworthy scores. Now, these might not always be the highest scores of the round because, no offense, Nick Newman, I don't know if you're going to be a top 6 defender, and there's not too many people who will be chasing his 160-point outburst, but I'm going to start with a couple of popular players. The first one is Christian Petrarca. He dominated with 143 against the Roos. He does this every season. He has a couple of big games. From memory, last year, he started the season on fire and had a couple of biggies. And as I kind of have a look now, he's actually 6th in total points. So shout out to anyone who took the punt on Petrarca. J-Lo has the man in his classic side. He's a tick over 900K now. So if you're bringing him in, hopefully, like I said, it does suit your buy structure, but he's a type of player that can single-handedly rip open a game of footy, and he benefited greatly from blowing out North Melbourne over the weekend. So only in 7-ish, call it 8% of teams at the moment, 7.5 if you want to get technical, but I still think that Christian Petrarca is a solid play. Jason Johannesson is the next one, and he's probably someone that I'll bring in this week. I've been eyeballing him for a couple of weeks, haven't been able to manufacture a trade for him with the likes of Luke Davies-Uniacke out and a few other bits and pieces here or there, but I really want to get amongst JJ this week. Scored an 86, took a couple of kickouts for the Dogs, got a couple of marks as he stereotypically does, and he's, I think, in a pretty good spot. He's priced under 600 grand. He's gone at 80 plus over his last 5 with a low of 67. And as long as he can get the high 60s to low 80s and hover around that 70s mark, I think that he's a fine player. Defender forward as well, which is worth mentioning, that you could potentially bring in to help remove a rookie off your field. He's already increased quite a bit in price. Like I said, I've been eyeballing him for a few weeks, and he's risen nearly 150 grand from his starting price. But there's still a little bit of meat on the bone. A matchup against GWS does give me some concern. I don't know the numbers behind it, but I feel like teams that play the Giants tend to struggle to score, and it's always a hard hit out. But I think that JJ can still score at a reasonable rate, and if you have a little bit of money to play with, you might be able to turn a Ruben Jinby into him, and it'll only cost you about 80 or 90K. So JJ deserves mention for what he's been doing. The big talking point, though, that a lot of coaches are wrapped around is the current Carlton midfield. Now, I know that the last 2 weeks they've played St Kilda and West Coast, who are 2 of, if not the 2 easiest teams to put fantasy numbers up against, but I want to highlight Adam Chera in particular. Had a pretty indifferent start to the year. He went 130 last week against West Coast. He's had a 137 against St Kilda the week before that. So two mammoth scores that will garner a bit of trade attention for the coaches. I don't know if too many people will be bringing him in, given that a lot of coaches at the moment will be trying to get rid of rookies, but Chera does offer some value. He's only been brought in by 350 coaches at the moment. His average is still under 100, so that tells you how much he did struggle earlier, but he is pretty cheap. If you can't afford to jump up to one of those big dogs, then he only costs you 812K. So it could be a potential play. Like I said, though, all the Carlton mids have been scoring recently. Blakey Acres, he's gone 126 and 129 in the last two. Paddy Cripps, 126 and 116. And the man that I brought in prior to the St Kilda game, Sam Walsh, a very popular trade target last week and probably rolling into this week as well. He's gone at 131 and 128. So if I had to rank some of these guys based on their fantasy relevance and which ones you want to bring in, I think Walshy is still the number one, regardless of if he's in the centre bounces, playing on a wing, playing at half forward. He tackles, he marks, he racks up stats all around the ground. So I think he's the smartest play. Costs about 950K now, so you've got to have a little bit of money behind you if you want that upgrade. But Chera, like I said, he's certainly an option. I don't think I'd be trusting Cripper or Akers or Matt Kennedy after he was utilised as the sub, but Walshy and then Adam Chera in that order are two Carlton midfielders that you may want to make a play for. The fourth noteworthy score, shout out to Cade Chandler, someone that I thought really had stalled in his production, had a couple of 40s and lackluster 60s mixed in after his fantasy century on debut, but the big man is getting it done. He's kicked 3 goals the last 2 weeks now. He's got 13 on the season. So if those goals do dry up, then all of a sudden his scoring probably will as well. However, scoring 106, he greatly benefited a lot of the coaches who were playing him on the ground. So if you do have him in your forward line, hopefully, I'm assuming that Sheasel's been flicked back. He's kind of in a class of his own. But if you do have Cade Chandler, he'd be a prime candidate to be a last on-field forward rookie. No offense to Lukey Pedler. Let's get a little bit dirty. Let's talk about Will Setterfield. He had 54, which is pretty fucking putrid for a lot of the fantasy community who has him in. He looked like a keeper pick about 4 or 5 weeks into the season, but hasn't exactly been going gangbusters in recent times. Like I said, he had a 54 on the weekend, coupled with an 86 fine the week before against Collingwood. That 5-day break probably did a number on a lot of the Bombers and Collingwood players. Didn't stop the Pies from snagging a victory, but he does have a couple of somewhat daunting fixtures as well. He's got Port Adelaide in Adelaide this week, and then they go up to play Brisbane at the Gabba. So 2 games that I don't think will warrant massive scores from all of the Essendon players. You expect Darcy Parish and the likes of Zach Merritt to maybe get a little bit done, but Setterfield, I'd probably give him another chance unless you can leapfrog up to a big name. Surely you've got more pressing trade issues. The next bloke, though, I'm not so sure deserves another life. Andy McGrath's the 6th one I want to talk about. He had his 20 touches. He actually leads the AFL in bounces, which I found surprising as I was looking at some of the stats earlier today, but a 66 coming off another 60 the week prior. It's not exactly what we expected from the man, and the role isn't there, unlike Will Setterfield. He's playing more of a lockdown, small defender role. He's getting a couple of junk stats in the back line, either receiving handballs or giving them to a runner, taking a few marks here and there. But I do think, given that his price is still in the mid 600s from memory, 662, a break even of 96, he's not, again, a must trade, but I think if you can, and you can flick him up to someone that is of note, whether that be in defense or the midfield, it's probably time to get rid of him. Some people may want to have a bit of a cash grab by downgrading Andy McGrath, and if you're going to do it, there's one bloke that is garnering a lot of attention in the fantasy realm at the moment, and that is Braden Fiorini. Now, I'm very, very divided about Braden Fiorini. Currently the most traded in player. Over 5,500 coaches have brought him into their side. And I think he's a bit of a trap, but he is priced at a reasonable position. If you've got an Andy McGrath and you go down to Fiorini, that pockets you about 100K at the moment, which is not chump change, and it can be certainly used in future weeks to help make some deals. I don't know if his spot in Gold Coast side is super concrete, and they've got the D's at home this week, and then that follows up with West Coast out west, Brisbane at the Gabba. and then 2 games at TIO Stadium against the Doggies and the Crows before his bye. So hopefully he can churn out some 70 and 80 plus scores around there. I think he'll really be a yo-yo. And again, someone that if he gets a rookie off the field, there's definitely worse options, but just temper a bit of expectations. He scored his 112 without getting a lot of touches of the footy, which is very unlike Fiorini. Had a lot of marks and tackles. Does tend to fill up the box score though, so I can see why there's a lot of appeal in grabbing him. And it's a move that I'm toying with, but again, I think let's just wait and see what the teams look like. It's every possibility that Bailey Humphrey loses his spot in Gold Coast side. Someone like Sam Flanders, who's had a couple of good VFL games, he might take Humphrey's spot. And then next week, or the week after, rather, in round 9, we may see Fiorini back out or utilised as the sub. So tread lightly. There is a little bit of concern there. I want to talk about one of the cash cows before I get to my last 2 value picks. Angus Sheldrick at number 8 for the noteworthy numbers. Now, why am I talking about Sheldrick? Because I really think you can still trust him. I know that a lot of my reputation is staked on the rookie roles and the rookie numbers. He didn't have a fantastic outing against who'd Gold Coast play? No, Sydney, rather. Jesus, I'm a bit all over this place. Against the Giants. He only had his 3 touches, 1 tackle, 2 marks. Pretty abysmal score of 18. 43% of game time. If you can bump that up and get towards 60 or 70, then I really think this bloke can get closer to hitting 50s. He's got decent numbers at the VFL level. He's put them up for a couple of years now, somewhat similar to Matty Roberts, but I think he has a bit more fantasy game about him. So Sheldrick, it's a disappointing thing if you brought him in last week and his break even is now 30 odd, which means that he's still priced as a basement player. If he keeps his spot in their side, though, I think that does say quite a bit about Sheldrick and what Sydney are expecting from him. There's no guarantees, and I'm worried that he'll either A, start the game as the sub, or B, end up getting subbed out this week when Sydney clash with... Who is Sydney playing? Whoever the hell Sydney are playing, but I do think that there's still some value there. I don't know if you can really trust him. You've got Collingwood, not ideal, but if he keeps his spot in their side, like I said, I still have faith in the youngster despite his crappy score. There's not a lot of rookies coming through, so we're going to have to get a bit fancy with our downgrade options. And I think that Sheldrick, if he is playing against the Pies, could be someone worth investing in. Speaking of value picks, a couple of other backmen are the 9 and 10 noteworthy numbers. I want to first talk about Brodie Kemp. Cheap option, could make you a few quick bucks, but I don't think he's going to score a ton again this year. In fact, I would go as to say I don't think he's going to score over 70 again this year. There's a couple of times he may churn out a score closer to 60, but he's never really had a fantasy game. So I would tread very lightly and think that there are other attractive options out there. The last one, number 10, though, is Rory Atkins. He had 102. Solid, obviously comes with a little bit of risk. But I had a look back to his numbers from 2022 that contributed to him being priced so low. I know there were a lot of marks up for grabs on the week against Richmond, which is why he was able to score 102. But let's have a little bit of a look at this. In the games last year where Rory Atkins played over 50%, because twice he was the sub and 3 times he was subbed off, he was able to average 61. And I think 60-ish is almost bang on what he can average, hopefully rolling through the bye period. There's no guarantees, though, that he's going to be there for the whole bye period. So it makes you a couple of quick bucks if you're able to jump over to him at the moment. Again, it's a move that I'm considering. Defender mid is priced at 386. There's a lot of people who are jumping on at the moment as well. Got the Ds again, like I've mentioned, with Fiorini. So not a huge fantasy factory of points coming up for the Gold Coast Suns, and they have had a reasonably cruisy stretch of fantasy foes. So there's risk involved, obviously, but if there's nothing better for you to do, you can potentially go him up from Corey Wagner or Lockie Cowan, and it only costs you 50 to 60K. So in a perfect world, even if you trade someone like Darcy Wilmot, that's going to cost you less than 20 grand. So someone worth considering, and pending on how team selection unfolds, I may be making a play at Rory the Rat Atkins myself. All right, I'm not going to burn through all the results from the weekend, but I just want to touch lightly on North Melbourne and West Coast's drubbings. Now, injuries are obviously mounting up for West Coast. That hasn't been a secret for the last, call it, 18 months. But North Melbourne are starting to have a couple of injury concerns of their own. I know that George Wardlaw was sent in for scans after hurting his knee in a practice match over the weekend, which really isn't great news for those of us that were hoping he could be a downgrade option. I don't know if I have as much faith in West Coast rebounding, even if they are healthy, though. And I think Adam Simpson really needs to be careful because West Coast have been pretty shithouse for the better part of 2 years. And I do think that Adam Simpson is a great coach and deserves to be still employed as an AFL coach. But someone's got to take the fall if these guys keep struggling. Granted, again, like I've said, a lot of it is contributed to injuries, but they still have a lot of senior heads out there on the weekend. Tim Kelly's having a fantastic year. Jaden Hunt is putting his hat in the ring as one of the recruits of the season. And I know that there's a lot of youngsters and a lot of the bottom feeders, say the bottom like 8 of West Coast's AFL side aren't fantastic. But to get smashed by 108, and then they lost a couple of weeks earlier. I can't remember who they were playing, but they just look really uninspired. And I know that Simo has had a lot of early success with his team. He's taken them to 2 grand finals. He's won a flag, but he could be someone that loses his gig this year. I don't think if I was running West Coast, I'd do it. I think I would try to move peripheral pieces around him, but I would not be shocked if he's given the can after West Coast's struggles. North Melbourne, I think that regardless of the injuries, they still have a bit of a brighter future. They kind of definitely bottomed out and have got some young guys in. They've got complementary pieces. The likes of Zeeble and Goldstein are really steady, heady veterans that can help teach the ropes to all these young guns. And Clarkson is worth his weight in gold. So I think North are going to be fine. We may be seeing these teams finish 17th and 18th consecutively, but respectively, rather, not consecutively. But I do think that there are testing times coming up for both of those squads. This weekend will be very interesting because North Melbourne, I know that they haven't been great, but they've got a match up in the last game of the round against St Kilda. St Kilda haven't been scoring a ton, so we may see North's offense restricted and St Kilda win by 5 or so goals. If they do that, I think North can kind of, emerge from it without too many negative headlines. If they get smashed by 10 to 12 goals, though, then that'll be a bit different. And from West Coast standpoint, going up against Richmond this weekend is a pretty daunting matchup for the Coasters. I don't think that Richmond are a great team, but it does worry me a little bit going to the MCG, just how this West Coast team's going to perform. If they show a bit of fight, and similar to North, they lose by 4 to 5 goals, they can probably take that as a small win or at least hold their heads high following that result. But if they then go to Richmond and they lose by 70 odd points, then that'll be really, really troubling signs for West Coast. So even though those two teams are struggling, they have their injury lists, I think that they can still show a bit of fight. And to their credit, West Coast particularly, they've gone all right in quarters of games or in small doses of quarters, halves of quarters, but they really need more consistent performances from some of their bigger dudes and some of their heady veterans if they want to be able to try and salvage somewhat of this season and at least have a platform to launch from into 2024. Looking at the rest of the ladder, I think that the Bombers and the Port Adelaide Power have earned a bit of respect in my eyes. The Power, I made one of my bold predictions in the offseason that Ken Hinkley would be fired by mid-season because I didn't really rate Port Adelaide. Kudos to them. I think that they've done really well. The Bombers, I nearly picked for the spoon, even though Brad Scott came in there. I thought that there's not really a A-grade material list that he's got to work with. And even without it, he's still having that team fight and looking pesky in games. I know they've lost to Collingwood and Geelong in the last fortnight, but those two are the, in my eyes, premiership favourites. So Essendon deserves a bit of credit and a bit of respect, and it sets up a pretty intriguing set of matchups this weekend. The Bombers, they've got Port Adelaide, why I'm kind of mentioning both those teams. And like I've said when I talked about the Setterfield and the McGrath schedule, going down to Port, if the Essendon can snag a win, that'll be huge for their top 4 and top 8 chances. And similar for Port, if they win, they'll probably end the round inside the top 4 and really have me eating my own words with regards to Ken Hinkley's job security. I think that if you look ahead just quickly at round 8, the easy, in my eyes, game of the round is Carlton versus Brisbane. The Blues have struggled to score recently. I know that Charlie Curnow outscored the West Coast by himself last week, but if they get a wide spread of goals, then I think that they're going to be in the window to challenge for a top 4 spot. But Brisbane, I feel like they're just starting to click and hit their straps. A couple of inconsistent performances, especially in the midfield to start their season, has them sitting 4th at the moment at 5-2, though their record really isn't that bad. So Carlton are only half a win behind them thanks to their draw against Richmond. And that, I think, is the game of the round and one that I'll be watching very, very intently. Before I talk a little bit of basketball, I had a little bit of a look just out of curiosity at the Brownlow medal odds at the moment. And it is astonishing to me that Nick Dacos is a $2.50 favorite to win the award. I know he's had a great season and he's probably going to be leading the count at the moment. He may have even got votes on the weekend against Adelaide. Some of his late efforts were pretty outstanding, but have to wait and see. I think that him being 250 less than a third of the way through the season, though, is pretty quickly going to look maybe not stupid because the bloke might actually win the award, but I don't think he's going to. I know that he's been great. I just feel like Collingwood's team ethos is really going to help them challenge for the flag rather than Nick Dacos's individual brilliance. Whereas when you look at the Brownlow, it really is those top dogs and the stars of the competition, not that he isn't one, that garner a lot of the voting attention. Someone like Clayton Oliver, I think, is still a genuine shout to win the award. Melbourne were my preseason pick to win the flag, and sitting second on the ladder at the moment, I'm still not concerned that there's any doubt around that. Marcus Bontempelli, he was one who actually put a bit of my hard-earned capital on to win the award, and he can definitely have a run of games that puts him into the lead of the vote count. And Jezza Cameron, he was one of my other bold predictions that he would finish runner-up to Josh Dunkley, so that hasn't exactly worked, but I do think that Jezza Cam, if he keeps kicking bags, can genuinely challenge for the Brownlow. So Nick Dacos is in the mix, sure. He's probably the favourite. I agree with that. But $2.50 favourite just 7 rounds into the season seems a bit dumb, if you ask me. All right, I'm not going to spend too long talking about basketball, but I did make some of my picks for each of these conference semis, and there's a couple of headlines that I want to just run through quickly. The game 1 between Denver and Phoenix was an example of why Denver are the best team in the West, in my eyes and in the eyes of a lot of people. I think one of the questions that Kevin Durant was asked after game 1 was, are you surprised with how Denver's going? And his response was something along the lines of, no, they're the best team in the West. They have a 2-time MVP, and that's why I think that they're going to be a really tough team to challenge. So I think that this series rather, could go the distance. I think we're going to 7, but I back the Nuggets in to win. And if they're going to win this series, regardless of the number of games, they're going to need to get performances like they did out of Aaron Gordon. He was perfect from the field in the first half, playing pretty good defense on the dynamic duo of Durant and Devin Booker. Then they got good other wing defenders like KCP and Bruce Brown, even Christian Brown, to help quell the influence of Phoenix's superstars. But Jamal Murray was on another level. He had 34. He had, I think at one stage, I don't know if he finished the game with more threes than Phoenix's roster combined. So if Murray and Gordon are performing well, Nikola Jokic is still going to get his close to triple-double numbers and do it really efficiently and cause a lot of issues for the men in the middle on the Suns side. So if you can have Murray and Gordon playing this way and then get a couple of other guys to pitch in with a few points here or there, Denver are going to be tough to stop. And I did say in the last basketball podcast that I think whoever wins this series can go all the way. I think they're going to be representing the West in the finals. The East, it still seems like Boston are going to be the ones that come out of there. If you had to have a look at the 4 teams remaining, no guarantees, obviously, because a couple of the other teams I'm about to talk about will put up a fight. But I still think that this Denver-Phoenix series is the best of the conference semis left over. And I got the Nuggies in 7, but they're going to have to get more performances out of Murray and Gordon if they want to really challenge for a chip. On the other side of the West bracket, we got the matchup we wanted. I know that the Sacramento Kings fans will be bummed and the Beam team will return. They'll be back, but I really want Steph and LeBron going against each other, and we're going to be treated to it. Steph Curry had a bit of a masterclass against Sacramento. He had 50 points, the most ever in a Game 7, which is pretty staggering when you think about it. Single-handedly dominated the Kings, and I don't think that the Kings lost any fans throughout this playoff series, but I think once the series got close to level, and then it was level at 2-2, myself included, I think a lot of people thought that the Warriors would take care of business. Credit to Sacramento, though, for forcing a Game 7. I think that in the next round, I'm going to kind of back in the Warriors. I know that LeBron, Anthony Davis, and the rest of the pieces around him have performed well, and they took care of the Grizzlies without too much fuss, but I think that the Warriors are going to win this one in 6. And part of the reason that I think that is because LeBron is still hurt. He hasn't been playing great. He had his 2020 game not too long ago against Memphis, Game 4 from memory. But he's not the same, I'm coming out and giving you 40 LeBron James. He's old, he's hurt, and I think without him performing at the peak of his powers, Golden State get it done. I could be wrong, and I don't really care who comes out of this because it'll be great to see either the Warriors or the Lakers in the conference finals against Phoenix or Denver, but I do think I'm going to give Golden State the slight edge. I think that their championship pedigree that they have from the last couple of seasons will just get them over the line against LA. Going out west, the other way, going out east, Embiid's health is unfortunately the biggest talking point between Philadelphia and Boston in what should have been a really good series, but I think without Embiid healthy, he's still listed as doubtful for for game one rather. By the time you're listening to this, there may be more news out regarding his status to take on Boston, but I don't think it's good, Philly fans. I'm really not confident that this team is going to live up to the hype. I know that multiple times throughout the season, and even on the last podcast, I said all eyes are going to be transfixed on their stars and if they can overcome their shortcomings in the postseason, but I don't think it's happening. I think Boston wins in 5. I think that they bat way deeper. Joe Mazzulla has had some sketchy moments coaching, but Marcus Smart started to find his groove as the series went on against Atlanta. Jason Tatum didn't have a great shooting series, so I expect him to somewhat rectify that. Jaylen Brown has been playing out of his mind. And again, like I said, they've got really good pieces. Derek White might be the most important role player in the league. Al Horford, Rob Williams, Grant Williams, Malcolm Brogdon. Boston are set. Those 7 to 8 guys, I think, are really going to give Philadelphia some trouble. They may prove me wrong, and Tyrese Maxey might get hot. James Harden might have a 30-point, 40-point game, and that could help swing things back in Philadelphia's favor. But with Embiid under an injury cloud and Boston scraping through against Atlanta and ready to kind of mount more of a challenge as they seriously vie for a championship, I think that this is going to get ugly for the Sixers. Last but not least, the Knicks and Heat squared off in game 1, which I haven't been able to fully dive into. I had work for most of the day. I'll probably go back and rewatch some either like a KO mini or the condensed game just to really wrap my head around how that game unfolded. But I think the Knicks are going to win this one in 7. I think that this is going to be a real grind 'em out bloodbath of a series. Jimmy Butler hurt his ankle with about 5 minutes to go and was effectively a spot-up shooter to close out the game. But Miami's role players and the rest of the complementary pieces around Butler got it done. So they were able to snag the game 1 victory. Again, I'm not going to give too many bits and pieces away because I haven't fully dove through the things, but I do want to give a useless sports by Fry stat. It's been a while since I've dropped a useless sports by Fry stat. Kyle Lowry had a playoff career high 4 blocks in this game, all of which were on Knicks players driving to the hoop. So special performance from Kyle Lowry. He really made some shots down the end that helped Miami cruise to, well, not cruise, but hold on to their lead and take out victory at MSG, which is pretty telling. They've now swung it back for home court advantage. I'm still siding with the Knicks in 7, but Kyle Lowry is the shortest player in NBA history to have 4 blocks in the playoffs. There's a useless nugget for you. And that is that. The Monday edition of the Sports by Fry pod is in the books. So we'll be back with my cash cows probably late Thursday night at this stage. I may do another NBA check-in. The draft lottery is still a couple of weeks away. So there's not tons to talk about from a hoops perspective, but I will maybe start doing a couple of other Q&As. I know that a lot of them will be AFL Fantasy orientated, but I might just introduce a midweek / Thursday Wednesday type of podcast. But for now, thank you for tuning into this episode. As always, it's appreciated. Until next time, peace.